So our key three takeaways for today's masterclass and what we're really excited to learn from Deborah are how wine education is being retooled for novice consumers of any age. Second, how we can lean into shifting consumer preferences to spotlight historically overlooked wines, for example, lower alcohol or sweet wines, and how consumers with varying degrees of wine education are influencing environmental stewardship within the industry. Welcome to Masterclass U.S. Wine Market with me, Barbara Fitzgerald. In this show, we'll break down the complexities of selling wine in the U.S. by discussing the relevant issues of today with experts from around the globe. Each episode serves up 3 key insights to help elevate your winery's presence in the U.S. market. So grab a pen and paper and let's pave the way for your success in the U.S. All right. Hello and welcome to Masterclass U.S. Wine Market. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Deborah Parker Wong to the show. Deborah Parker Wong is a WSET diploma and a national editor for the Slow Wine Guide USA and also a global wine editor for SOMM Journal. She's covered the beverage alcohol industry for these and other outlets since 2004. She also currently teaches wine studies at San Jose State University, Santa Rosa Junior College, and Cabrillo College, all in California. And in addition to that, she owns a wine and spirit education trust school offering level 2 and level 3 certifications. Deborah's also currently pursuing a master's degree in viticulture and enology at California State University, Fresno, with an emphasis in sensory science. Her motto is to learn, read, to know, write, to master, teach. Welcome to the show, Deborah. It's so great to have you here. It's amazing you find the time with how busy you are.
I'm delighted to be here, Barbara, and I would absolutely make time for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, before we dive into today's discussion, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you came to the wine industry?
I'd be happy to. I'd like to keep it brief. How I got to this point in time in my life, which is my third career. But I found my way to wine when I was working as a chef in residence. A chef in residence is a cook that lives with people. And I was putting myself through junior college, living in Santa Barbara. And I'd always loved to cook. You know, I grew up watching Julia Child on television and reading Gourmet magazine. And I found I had a knack for it. And so I lived in residence. I had a massive kitchen garden. I raised beef and I managed a wine cellar. You know, I was 18 to about 25. I did that. It was a very enriching experience. And then when I graduated, I moved to San Francisco and I started working at a PR firm, a boutique PR agency that had celebrity chef clients and fine dining restaurants. And it was there that I met some folks that were very influential in my journey, in the start of my journey. And that was some master sommeliers, particularly Evan Goldstein and Tim Gazer, who are icons in that community. And from that point forward, I started studying wine. I mean, I had dabbled in wine, you know, I managed a wine cellar and drank wine, but now I really applied myself at that point. And, you know, I spent some time working in the high-tech industry, but when I needed to make a change, I came back very intentionally to wine and started my third and my sunset career, as I call it.
And you've been there ever since, doing some pretty incredible things.
Right. I haven't strayed because I've been very busy. I wrote my first article in 2004 for what is now the Tasting Panel magazine, a publication I still contribute to. And I am, of course, global wine editor for sister publication SOMM Journal. So I have been with those publications since day one.
Well, in this episode specifically, we'll talk to Deborah about her very rich experience as a globally renowned wine educator and guide editor, and how this has sharpened her insights into consumer preferences and emerging trends and really shaping the future of the wine industry. So our key 3 takeaways for today's masterclass and what we're really excited to learn from Deborah are how wine education is being retooled for novice consumers of any age. Second, how we can lean into shifting consumer preferences to spotlight historically overlooked wines, for example, lower alcohol or sweet wines, and how consumers with varying degrees of wine education are influencing environmental stewardship within the industry. Let's dive right in, Deborah. Let's start with the education aspect, which is definitely kind of the topic of some debate right now. So kind of plain and simple, how much should we be trying to educate a casual wine consumer?
that is a very hot topic. And I'm so thrilled to see education at the forefront of the discussion of wine marketing and wine sales, because I'm a firm believer that education is going to be absolutely essential to the continued health and economic health of the wine industry. Education plays a crucial role in determining whether students of any age who are exploring wine become wine likers or become wine ambivalent. Right now with novice consumers, my whole objective is to help develop wine likers, people that understand what they enjoy and pursue what they enjoy and explore what they enjoy. Now, there's been a lot of online discussion because I've been posting some of the articles I've written about this, and I've also posted some on social, and there's been very interesting engagement on various social platforms and feedback from people who, some of whom have said, oh, this is just a knee-jerk reaction to the doldrums that the industry seems to be facing. We're in a bit of a quandary. I completely disagree. I think this discussion has been going on in the background, has played second fiddle to things like scores and distribution and all the other aspects of the industry that we constantly have to navigate. But now education seems to be maybe one of the keys that we can use to unlock the future of, wine consumption in this country, possibly in the world.
You teach courses, especially in local colleges and WSET, of course, but how are the people that find you, how do they get to you? Are they already have a little bit of a curiosity piqued? They just need to meet extracurricular, requirement or?
That's a very, very key question, because there are many different types of groups. And that would make a good infographic as well, too. Who are the people studying wine? And from my lens, my perspective as an educator, I've got a complete spectrum from absolute wine novices who don't even know if they like wine or what wine is or what it can be, to people who are enthusiast students and professionals who go on to become masters of wine. That is the entire spectrum, Barbara. That's everyone. I really do see it all. And I had a bit of a revelatory moment when I started teaching at San Jose State University a wine appreciation class. Up until that point, the majority of students that I've had for the last, 15, 17 years have been people who are wine enthusiasts, people who enjoy wine, want to learn more about it. This group of students are undergraduate students who are taking wine appreciation as an elective. And this is a completely different audience. These are the folks who largely do drink alcohol, or they wouldn't be in the class. They drink a broad range. They have a broad range of choices. They drink different kinds of alcohol, but they're curious. They're wine curious. There's a completely different approach for these students than for a WSET level 2 or a student pursuing an associate degree of wine studies at Cabrillo College, which is a degree we offer there. This student required completely retooling the curriculum.
What we can really do, I think, to grow our consumer base in wine is we want to look to the people that are already drinking alcohol and get them more interested in wine. So what are you doing specifically for those more curious students to get them engaged, to get them excited?
Well, if I were going to be truly candid, I might say pandering. But and hey, it is what it is. But what I'm doing is I'm revising a curriculum that gives students an opportunity to approach wine, the assessment of or the evaluation of wine, in different ways. Just like we have different learning styles. I have a global learning style, real pain, because it requires using all your senses, kinesthetic, and I know my learning style, and there are lots of different learning styles, but wine, for the most part, has not failed to maybe acknowledge it, but failed to implement that. It failed to create different ways where students can learn about wine. And this is what I discovered in education research class, where I wrote a study proposal that adopts a more hedonic or in a more emotional way of evaluating and visualizing wine. And so using the visualization approach, we call it game-based learning, in contrast to a more traditional rubric and lexicon-based approach, which is, of course, WSET, which I, have been involved in WSET since 2004. So I'm teaching both of these different approaches to these novice students. And then they can choose which one of the two fits them in terms of the work that they're doing in the class. And this is done right at the beginning of the course. We start with teaching a little bit about sensory physiology, how we actually taste and smell and detect flavor. And then we move into teaching them about using this visualization app. Yes, it's an app. They visualize their perception of the wine. And then I teach them the WSET systematic approach to tasting at level 2, which is a very straightforward analysis of the structural components of the wine. And I know you're familiar with it. And then they get to decide which of the two they would like to use throughout the course of the semester.
What I really love about that approach too is we will always have consumers who are more here for the lighter side of wine, for the enjoyment of it. Maybe more of our consumers will be that anyway. And then we'll also have consumers who, like us, will become, want to seek out education at every corner that they can. And so you're serving both of those needs and creating, a level of engagement in both of those spaces.
Well, thank you, but we're trying. I mean, this is new, this is relatively new, but I was inspired by finding, and believe me, they are few and far between, finding a program called Quinny that allows you to create a visual graphic of your perception that illustrates your perceptions of the wine. So it's much more kind of emotional, perceptive, and basically folks that have been studying using a rubric and a lexicon, traditional method, either through the chord or through WCT, we're not used to being emotional about wine. And so it's a bit of a stretch for some of us. For years have only worked one way. And now to be flexible and kind of say, oh, I can work this way too. And I've been practicing.
Yeah, I would say that even in WSET, it's kind of almost like you're removing emotion from the wine to be more objective about it and just looking at it more linearly. So it's nice for people that think, with more shoulders.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of using just a kind of traditional analytical approach, which works great. It's worked great for me professionally, but it's not a one size fits all. Just like we have different learning styles, students want different approaches. And we're certainly capable of developing them and providing them for students. So I'm getting busy with that.
That's great. I have a question actually. So in my line of work as a DTC wine business strategist, I see all the time the urge to want to educate consumers, and a DTC consumer specifically is usually a visitor to a tasting room. But should we be more focused on their enjoyment than like soil types and terpene? Like, how can we maybe use some of your research to bring in the right level of education in the right way to people in a setting like that aren't students in a classroom?
I've been thinking a lot about this because that's a conundrum, because we consumers of wine knowledge, we want to share. It's just human nature. We just want to share what we know. And what else are we going to talk about? Right? You're standing behind the tasting, you're standing at a table conducting an experience for a group of consumers, right? It's no longer just belly up to the tasting bar. We have experiences to deal with now. So, you're standing there or you're sitting there with a group, and there's going to be silence. I mean, what are you going to talk about if not the production methods, the terroir, the quality or the pursuit of quality? We just have to find different talking points. And the person, the educator, quote unquote, has to be able to gauge the level of interest in the consumer. And the consumer will drive that because they're going to ask questions. Hopefully, if they're really interested in knowing about production methods and terroir and specifics about wine quality, those questions will come, right? They will pose those questions. But if they simply want to entertain one another, enjoy conversation, maybe talk about one of the other many fascinating things about wine, which, as we know, includes history, culture, it could even include archaeology. It's just a window to the world, so many different things that we can talk about that
aren't so technical necessarily.
That aren't technical or specific to production or whatever.
Yeah. So it's about people in those situations, well, or in any situation, because you're doing the same, is you really have to listen to what the consumer or the student is telling you by the questions that they're asking and by kind of what information they're already seeking.
Well, as an educator, I'm really lucky. I have discussion assignments where I learn things about students up front and do that. As a winery educator, you might not have that opportunity. It's like a sommelier on the floor. You're just approaching a table unless you're doing massive research on people. So maybe what we need to think about doing is writing scripts. Now, scripts that wouldn't be delivered verbatim, but you've got a quality or production based script, you've got a history based script, you've got different kind of dialogue sets that people can fall back on when you're at risk of boring your audience, trying to cast around and find out what is the area, what is the topic that's going to push the button for them, what is going to
Yeah.
engage them, where are we
Keep them
going.
most excited. Yeah. Those are all some wonderful insights. So thank you for those. Let's shift a little bit into how shifting consumer preferences are helping maybe some historically forgotten about wines. So given these current consumer preferences, which styles or production regions do you really see thriving in this environment?
This is fantastic because I have been evolving my list as I do get out and do field study and travel. And I go to either regions that I know well and I look for gems, or I am discovering a new region. I was recently in Montefalco doing some field study and discovered a new gem there for my students. So believe me, the world is my oyster. I'm out there cherry picking and gathering all of these wines that actually have taken me years to learn about. I mean, many of these wines, of course we learn about Moscato d'Asti, but what about Brachetto d'Asti? What about, we learn about Valpolicella? What about Ripasso, this delicious, rich red blend, authentic red blend that is very appealing to students? I have this very long and growing list of wines that I will be showing my wine appreciation students that looks nothing like the wines that I show my WSET students or that I show my students in more advanced classes, academic wine classes. It is a very different list. The favorite wine of students last semester was a Molieu Chenin Blanc from the Loire Valley. Now that isn't that cool? It wasn't Moscato. Now, Moscato d'Asti was up there in the ranks, but when it came right down to it, they liked the Chenin. And what I do and what I've found is that if I introduce them to a wine and I have to taste all these wines before I pour them because there can't be any surprises, right? I need to know exactly what the students are getting. So I choose a gorgeous Molieu Chenin from Vouvray, and I pour it for the students, and then I follow it with a Chenin, a dry Chenin wine. Now, Molieu is going to have some perceptible residual sugar. I follow it with a dry Chenin, but one that's fruity from a riper vintage or from a particularly warm spot that shows lots of fruit and lots of, and not super acidic. And I can bridge the students from a Molieu wine to a particular style, a dry wine of the same grape variety, if I'm careful with my wine choices. Now, people would say, that doesn't make sense. You don't go from sweet to dry. Well, you can go from perceptibly sweet to fruity, which people perceive that fruit as sugar, and they don't even look at the finish of the wine until we get later down the road. We start using that WSET metric to say, well, what about the finish? So there is an approach that has been working, and I'm going to continue to refine it and grow my list of wines, which will now include a Montefalco Rosso that I discovered that has a little bit of perceptible RS to kind of counter a little bit of the Sagrantino. And that was an absolutely new discovery that will be in the classes this semester.
That's wonderful. Good news for Montefalco.
Oh yeah, because boy, everyone usually thinks Sagrantino. How are we going to do that? If a student learns about a Montefalco Rosso and falls in love, you can bet that they're going to explore further. And that's what we need. We need wine likers who are curious wine likers.
Yes. Aside from all of your educator roles involved with the Slow Wine Guide and SOMM Journal, so how do you see these guides kind of being driven by current consumer preferences? And also, what are the most buzzworthy wines for those guides at the moment?
Okay, well, they're two different animals. The Slow Wine Guide is USA now. In its seventh edition, we're researching the 2025 guide now, is definitely a consumer guide, but it is read widely by the trade and read by the wineries. Of course, the 400 plus wineries that are listed in the guide are reading the guide. And it's odd because you think about a guide is not like something you would read, right? But this guide is a perfect read because you've got 300 words and some interesting little graphics about a winery. You can read in snippets. You can read, if you're going to Napa, you could read the whole Napa section and read about, 50 wineries in less than 300 words each. That's pretty amazing. It's a shortcut for sure. But now the trade publications that I write for, the SOMM Journal, the Tasting Panel, I do contribute to others as well too. Those are specifically for the trade. That is the trade hat is on. I am definitely being technical. I'm exploring in my sense and accountability column all aspects of perception related to wine. I think the most compelling and interesting writing I've been doing for the last couple of years has been there. I write features as well, and I get to dive into, where I get to dive into individual producers. And I have a column called Date by the Gate, which is when producers are here working the market and doing tastings, a lot of important vertical tastings, historic tastings. I get to share news about that there. So
if an Italian winery wanted you to taste, wanted SOMM Journal or Tasting Panel to taste some of their wines, like what are you guys really looking for right now?
Well, it's important that they be represented here in the United States, right? That they be in our market somewhere at some point. And given the amount of work I've done in Italy in the last couple of years, I know there are many producers that would like to gain entry to the US market, which of course is the largest wine consuming market in the world and continues to be so. So we're an important market. It's gotten harder. But if a producer, most of the Italian producers that are not already represented in our distribution system, either by their own direct sales companies or organizations or through a importer or distributor or a direct importer. We have lots of different models now in the 3-tier, and new models are emerging in the 3-tier as well. I just saw something from RNDC, that a pilot program from RNDC that looks interesting. But at any rate, if an Italian producer is here in this market and wants to taste, all they have to do is reach out to me. Now, bear in mind that I do not score wine. Only when I'm judging a wine competition, which I do frequently, do I score wines. So I don't score wines for the publications, although I do write tasting notes. There are other writers who do the scoring.
Good to know. But always nice to get your feedback and have notes from you, and also for you to know the wines that are out there coming into our market.
Absolutely. I spend a lot of time tasting, and like we talked about earlier, I do frequently invite producers to taste here at the house, which is a nice break from a restaurant or hotel. But I do enjoy going out on premise and meeting folks on premise in restaurants and hotels and tasting with them. So, and I do, whenever my schedule allows, I do that.
Well, Deborah, we're so grateful to you for sharing all these fabulous insights. And as we start winding down, it's time for our rapid fire quiz, where we ask our guests 3 questions to help our listeners better understand the U.S. wine market. So please try to answer in a couple sentences if you can. Number 1, what is your number 1 tip for mastering the U.S. wine market?
Let's focus on finding and nurturing wine likers.
Good answer. Number 2, what is your number 1 tip for engaging new consumers?
Meet them where they're at. Really listen and provide options, just like I'm doing when it comes to studying wine. We can have different approaches, and we should make those options and different approaches accessible and enjoyable.
Yeah, I like the enjoyment piece. That's so important these days. And lastly, what is your favorite travel hack when doing market work?
Mine is a hack that is well practiced now. Fine hospitality goes hand in hand with doing field study or being out in the field and meeting with producers. There's always an amazing level of hospitality. And mine is called the half habit, which means that when I'm, served food, beautiful, beautiful food, often multiple courses, I just make a point of eating half in front of me. And yes, sometimes I do, I don't always practice that, but I just try to make it a habit. And I say a habit is better than a rule because everyone loves to break rules. But habits, you practice it enough, it becomes a habit. And then, just half of that risotto is delicious risotto has been enjoyed, and then I rest easier.
It can be hard to stay busy when you're having, large 10-course meals.
Yeah. Well, we think about moderation and all the things we're supposed to do, but I just like the idea of having a habit like exercise. For me, exercise is now a habit. It's not a rule or a must do or a should do. It's just a habit.
Well, Deborah, thank you so much for joining us today on Masterclass US Wine Market on the Italian Wine Podcast. How can our listeners connect with you?
Well, it's really easy to find me online. You can find me at DeborahParkerWong.com, which is pretty straightforward, where I archive most of the editorial writing that I do, most of my columns. You can search by categories if you have topics. You're welcome to reach out to me by email. And my general email is just my name, DeborahParkerWong@gmail.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you again so much for sharing all your expertise with us, Deborah. I hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Barbara.
Take care. Ciao.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Masterclass US Wine Market. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest industry trends, remember to like, follow, and share our podcast. And if you find value in our conversations, please leave us a review to help others discover the show and grow our community. Stay tuned for new episodes every Monday. Until then, brindiamo il vostro successo.